Coaches, welcome to a new series on the podcast. I'm really excited to share this with you. Just to set the stage a little bit for it, this is going to be pretty unedited content. It's really going to be me sharing my reflections on coaching an under 11 boys basketball team this spring. Just to set the stage a little bit for you and give you some context for the team, um, it's a team of 11 fifth graders or boys that are under 11 years old. And out of those 11, I have three returning players from last season when I coached them as under 10 players. We practice twice a week for 90 minutes each time. We'll play a couple tournaments each month, primarily locally. And I'll just be sharing short reflections on practices and games throughout the season on the podcast. Many of you have probably seen some of the reflections I did last season on Twitter and or the ones I've already started to do this season. And it'll just be a little bit more in detail on what I share there. Some of those thoughts really expounded upon and just some honest reflection about how things are going. And my hope is that it can be really valuable for you as you listen, that it will prompt you to reflect on your coaching and hopefully provide some really practical things that you can implement in your coaching, adjustments that you can make that will improve your coaching and ultimately improve the experience of the athletes you're coaching, help them get better at the sport and have a more enjoyable experience. And so I actually am going to do two reflections in this first podcast episode here. I want to share just a brief reflection on tryouts that we held a couple weeks ago for this team. There's really three things that I was thinking about during and after tryouts for this U11 boys basketball team. I'm coaching the B team. So there's an A team that has about 10 kids on it, and then my B team has 11 kids on it. And as tryouts were going on and I was reflecting afterwards, the first thing that was on my mind was just the reality that when we go into tryouts, we should really start with the assumption that we're probably going to get it wrong. And here's what I mean by that. We're really just making the best educated guess we can about a couple things. One, who's the best right now? And what is the ideal level for them to be at? That question of desirable difficulty. What team is best situated for their skill set and skill levels? Tryouts are a pretty brutal thing, especially with 11-year-olds. I want as many kids as possible playing the game, being retained, enjoying it. But unfortunately, our system isn't necessarily set up for that. And so trying to do the best we can with the current system can be challenging. It's really necessary that we sort because like we just talked about with desirable difficulty, we want athletes at a level that isn't too hard because we know if it's too hard, it just breeds anxiety. And we don't want them at a level that's too easy because we know that that just breeds boredom. And so it's necessary that we sort them into that kind of desirable difficulty skill level wise, but it can still be really difficult. And the reality is that when we sort, we really don't know who's going to turn out and develop in the long run. Physically, mentally, socially, technically, tactically, we just really don't know. They're too young. They have so much development to go. And so we're really just taking the best guess that we can. And we should probably start with the assumption that we're probably going to get it wrong, and just have that mindset going in to kind of remove some of the pressure. We're just going to go in, we're going to do the best we can at evaluating. And then ultimately, once we get those kids, we're going to do our very best to develop all of them. The second reflection I had from tryouts was this: everybody's anxious. Everybody's feeling some anxiety. Those kids, they just want to be noticed. They just want to be seen, and they really just want to make that team. For a whole host of reasons. They love the game socially. Maybe it's pressure that they feel from parents or friends. They want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want to make the team. And that can produce some anxiety. And the second group is parents. The same thing. They want their kids to make the team. They don't want their kids to have to experience that heartbreak. And, at this tryout, parents were actually sitting on the stands watching, and you can just see some of the parents feeling anxious as their kid makes a play, doesn't make a play, whatever it may be. And they're just hoping for the same thing, that their kid gets a chance. And then the last group that I think feels a little bit anxiousness is the coaches. Like I mentioned earlier, often selections are really hard, especially at this age. And, ideally, I would have loved if every single kid could be on a team that was the right fit and the right level for them. But like I said, unfortunately, the system's just not set up for that. Most organizations just can't handle that amount of kids. There's a lot of challenges there. But for me, particularly, the part that was a little bit stressful was just as I got towards the end of my list, as I was keeping 10 or 11 kids, it was really hard to make a decision on the last 2 or 3 kids. Again, because 1, I've only seen them play a little bit, and and 2, there wasn't necessarily a huge difference between a handful of the kids in my observations, watching them play some small-sided games and go through some drills. And so I think there's can be a level of anxiety for us as coaches. Am I getting this right? You know, who is the right fit here? Not only skill level, but maybe personality, and the things you saw from them and their behavior during it. And the third kind of reflection that I had from tryouts was the importance of small-sided games for evaluation, especially at young ages. The most valuable part of the tryout for me in evaluating skill level of players was watching them play 3-on-3 for a few reasons. They got a lot more touches on the ball. Every kid did. In 3-on-3, it's a lot harder for athletes to hide than it is in 5-on-5. In 3-on-3, there was much less of 1 or 2 athletes who might be bigger and stronger for their age dominating the ball, and the other kids just standing and watching. And so playing these small-sided games at tryouts, I think are really, really key and important, if nothing else, to just give kids kind of a fair shot. Because the reality is some kids are just bigger and stronger as 11-year-olds than others, but some of these kids are actually fairly skilled if they're put in a game that's developmentally appropriate. And now, unfortunately, this U11 boys basketball team I'm coaching, we're going to play 5-on-5 in games. I wish that we weren't. I wish it was 3-on-3 or 4-on-4, but the games will be 5-on-5. And that's the reality of it. But to actually evaluate where they're at as basketball players, the small-sided games were key. There were multiple kids that I kept on my team that I might not have kept if I hadn't had a chance to watch them play 3-on-3 and see how they use space, the way they made decisions, and just see a quantity of reps. Whereas if they had been playing 5-on-5 or even 4-on-4 the whole time, there's a lot of kids that just wouldn't have gotten that many reps. So I think it's really important as we do tryouts, prioritize planning and using time for small-sided games so that you can see kids make lots of decisions. That kind of does it for my tryout reflections. I want to now share some reflections on our first practice. And, first practice is a big deal. I think it's really, really important that we're intentional about the first interactions that we have with our team. And as I was planning this practice and drawing some inspiration from my conversation with Mark Bennett that I recently shared on the podcast, I just came up with 3 points of success criteria for myself. And actually, I have 2 assistant coaches helping with me this year, which I'm really grateful for. Only one was able to be at this first practice, but I came up with 3 points of success criteria for us as coaches. And the first one is that we would establish a team identity and our standards. The second one is that coaches would learn every kid's name by the end of the first practice. And the third one was that players will learn our platform games. And I'll talk more about platform games in a minute. And as I was reflecting on the practice after it ended, there were really 3 things that stood out. And these were things that I was thinking about in my planning, but then also afterwards just really stood out as being really important, in my opinion, and based on the experience of that first practice. And the first thing that stood out was the importance of prioritizing and creating a psychologically safe environment from those first interactions. I made sure to greet kids when they came into the gym, to introduce myself to them, to get a positive and appropriate touch with them. And then when we were ready to get practice started and I called them into a huddle in the center of the court, we made sure the first thing we did was we learned each other's names. We learned each other's names. You got to know names. That's where connection starts. And that was one of our success criteria as coaches, is that we were going to learn all their names. From there, I told them, I said, guys, this is going to be the longest we're going to talk all season without playing basketball, but I really need you to be engaged with me here because there's some really important information that I need to share with you and some things we need to get on the same page about before we start playing basketball. And the first thing I shared with them was my one rule. I said, guys, I only have one rule, and it's this. It's called the say hi, say bye rule. When you get to practice, you must come say hi to myself and the other coaches. And when practice is over, before you leave, you must come up to us and say bye to each coach. Um, they usually kind of smile or laugh at this, as it doesn't sound like a very serious rule, but it is actually really important. And it's, again, just to prioritize, make sure they know that we care about connecting with them. And it's a great opportunity as we establish this routine to get a pulse for how that individual athlete is doing when they come into your gym and when they leave your gym. And it's presented me with opportunities to have conversations when they're needed, to encourage kids, to ask them some important questions. The second thing we talked about in that first huddle were my two non-negotiables. And the two non-negotiables were this: be locked in and be respectful. What I did is I actually shared these with them, and then I had them define it with a partner. So I had them in groups of 2 or 3. They would turn and talk to their partner, and they would just try to define what they think that meant. We would share that together. I might add a little bit in there, maybe something they missed that's part of that non-negotiable for me. And I just said, guys, these are things I expect from you all the time. I'm looking for these things all the time. And I just shared on the other side of things like respectful. I just shared a few things that are not respectful and things that are not acceptable on our team. I just made it very clear that, guys, these things aren't how we do it here. We don't talk to people in demeaning tones. We don't talk negatively about each other. We don't show bad body language to our teammates when they make mistakes. I just made it clear on some things that were acceptable and unacceptable, and I allowed them to speak into what they thought it was. And then the third thing I did was talked about the 3 values for our team, and these are values from the organization I'm coaching with, and so the organization really wants us to emphasize using these values and this language with our team, um, to help instill these values in our athletes. And the 3 values are service, excellence, and fun. And so we did 2 things with those 3 values. The first is that we defined each word. Just like I mentioned earlier, they would turn and talk with a partner. We'd share the definition. What does service mean? We'd define it and then say, what does it look like to serve in the context of our basketball team in practices and games? Again, had them discuss with their partner and then share out. And we came up with a list of a handful of things that would exemplify service in basketball. Things like diving on the floor for loose balls, things like running hard in transition, things like setting your teammates up for success. And then we did that with excellence and fun as well. And then the last thing I did in that pre-practice huddle, to create some psychological safety and to establish that team identity and those standards that were part of my success criteria, was I gave what Doug Lemov calls a rollout speech. I really took this from his book, The Coach's Guide to Teaching, and some examples he shared around it. But the rollout speech was just a couple things about how we will do specific things. And those specific things were stoppage routines and questioning. Questioning, I told them how I was going to ask them questions throughout our practices this season. The first thing I said is, guys, I'm going to ask you questions. The most important thing is that when I ask a question, you don't shout out the answer. You don't shout out the answer so that other people have time to think. And then I said, there's multiple ways that I might ask you to respond. I might have you turn and talk like I've done today. I might ask for volunteers, or I might cold call on you. I might call on you randomly. And it's important with this. I said, some of you might be nervous to be called on randomly, which actually I had already been doing in our huddle. After they would turn and talk to a partner, I would then call on someone randomly from there. I said, it's okay if I call on you and you don't know the answer. We'll figure it out together. But it's important that you're always ready to do your best to answer. It's okay if you don't know it and you make a mistake. That's perfectly acceptable here. And within that too, there was definitely a message of mistakes are okay in this environment, which again is a big piece of psychological safety for these athletes. So that kind of wraps up reflection point number one, the importance of creating that psychological safety in those first interactions and that success criteria of establishing kind of that team identity, standards, and some ways that we'll do things. And the second thing is similar to a few of the things I was just talking about, but it is all about investing time in routines at the beginning so that you will save time later. So I'll give you just some examples of some routines that I have started to try to establish in the first practice that I think are really important. The first one is how we huddle at the beginning and end of practice. We came into the center circle, we stood right around the circle, and that's just part of our routines. Additionally, at the end of practice, I shared that one of our routines is going to be doing what we call celebrations, recognizing athletes and athletes recognizing each other for where they lived out those three values: service, excellence, and fun. And so at the end of practice, when we had a huddle, we made sure to do a few celebrations, primarily the coaches. Then I actually had one athlete that was with me last season share a celebration about another player so they could see it modeled from a peer. But we established that routine for how we'll end practice in that huddle. The second thing that I think is really important to establish are just some routines around how you do things in practice. And for example, I was very specific with them about how we substitute. And so sometimes we'll be playing a 4-on-4 game, and there might be one or two athletes that are not in the game at the moment. When we make substitutes, I told them two things. The first is everyone subs out once before anyone subs out twice. How we do subs. That's the first part of it. The second is when you sub someone out, here's how you do it. You say a name, you say it loudly, and you get a touch. Okay, so the first time it was time for subs, I was looking for this. It didn't happen the first time. I said subs and they didn't say a name, they didn't say it loudly, and one of them got a touch, but the other one didn't. So I just said, guys, pause. I want subs to go back to where you were. Reminder, when we sub, we say a name, we say it loudly, we get a touch. Show me that now. Go. They do it, boom, we start playing again. This seems really small, but if you want to establish something as a routine, you have to watch for it. And when it doesn't happen, just have them redo it. Just have them redo it. It's not a time where I'm going to lecture them or get mad at them. This is a new routine and habit that's just not cemented in their brain yet. So I just reminded them and had them do it again. I think that's really important because in the long run, it's going to save me time and energy. I'm not going to be frustrated about poor substitutions or wasting time because people don't know who they're subbing in for and people aren't hustling on and off the court. We invest that time up front. We watch for it. We reinforce it. When they do it right, we celebrate it so that it becomes a habit and saves us time in the long run. Second thing that we invested in as far as routines in the first practice was stoppage routines. And so I told them about these in that beginning of the practice huddle. My two stoppage routines are yelling the word freeze, and we talk about it and practice it. If I yell the word freeze, I expect you to stop right where you are, give me your full attention as quickly as possible. So anytime I would yell that word freeze, I would immediately start looking for athletes that were doing what we had talked about, or if I blew one long whistle. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in that last point, name it and praise it. The last thing under investing in routines was the entire first practice was all about teaching and them learning our platform games. Platform games are games or drills that we're going to use throughout the season that are very simple structures that we can tweak via constraints or rules to shift the emphasis of focus for learning. So I actually had, I think, 4 or 5 platform games and drills planned, but I didn't quite get to all of them. There's one of them I didn't get to just for the sake of time, which I was okay with. But the thing that was most important to me was that they start to learn these games and drills so that we cut down on our transition time. I don't have to teach a bunch of new games and drills each practice. We can use these structures that they know, and I can adjust the game with different rules or constraints. There's 3 things I think are really important when you're rolling out platform games or any new drill. The first thing is you got to give them a name for it. What's the name of this drill? The second thing is the spacing or locations for it. where are athletes located in the drill? And the third thing is the rules of it. And those might be subject to change, but what are the basic rules of it that will always be constant? And here's my third piece from my reflection of practice one: name it and praise it. I just kind of alluded to it earlier, but it is so, so important in the first practice and really in every practice that we name and praise the specific behaviors we want more of. What we praise gets repeated. I did a lot of what I call call outs in the first practice. A call out is just in the moment when I see a behavior that I want more of, I call it out. I call it out, and preferably in front of everyone. I might even stop practice briefly, direct everyone's attention to something, and celebrate it right in the moment. And so, for example, I gave them that non negotiable of being locked in, that they turn towards me, they stop moving, they give me eye contact, they set the ball down, or they lock it in on their hip. And when I would stop play, or when I was trying to teach something, the first thing I would do when I stopped play is I would look and I would scan for athletes that were locked in, and I would celebrate it. Drew, I really appreciate the way that you gave me your full attention right when I said the word freeze. Thank you. Even in that first huddle, I was doing the same thing. I would tell them to turn and talk, and when I asked for their attention back on me, I would celebrate multiple athletes as they gave me their full attention. There were a couple times I even pointed to an athlete and said, "Everyone look right now at this athlete. This is exactly what I'm looking for when I'm talking." I think it's really important that we name it and praise it from the start. And like I said with substituting, they're not going to be perfect at it. They're not going to be perfect at it, especially at the start and even throughout your season, right? It may slip at times, but it's really important that we name it and praise it. And then when they don't do it, that we just give them chances to redo it. Hey guys, remind me, what's the expectation when I say the word freeze? Ask for a couple volunteers, get their answers. Yes, that's what I expect. I'm going to actually send you back to playing. And the next time I say freeze, show me that. They play, I say freeze, boom. They meet the expectation that we had set and just reminded them of, and then I celebrate it right there. John, thank you so much for giving me your full attention when I said the word freeze. This sounds really small, but as you continue to send this message, it will reinforce and cause those behaviors that you want to see to show up more. It just will. It works. Positive reinforcement goes a long, long way in creating that culture that you want. And so I guess I would leave you guys with just a few thoughts on the success criteria for this practice at the beginning. Those three things. The first one, that we wanted to establish team identity and standards. Coaches would learn every kid's name, and players will learn our platform games. Overall, I think we made progress on all of those. Players definitely haven't totally learned those games yet. They've been introduced to them, but they won't be cemented in their long-term memory until a few more practices and a few more times when they have been exposed to them. And I just want to share one final thought on what I would change next time, or what didn't work as well. There's two things. The first is teaching things at first sometimes just takes a little bit of extra time because it's new. I'm very intentional about allowing athletes to ask questions to try to find misunderstanding before it shows up in the game or drill. However, sometimes, especially with younger athletes, you'll start to get so many questions that it delays the start of what you're doing and your stoppage goes on too long. This happened with one of the platform games I was teaching. There was just too many questions that started to get asked. And so actually the next time I was doing a platform gamer drill, I explained it. I said, "Hey, I've got time for 3 questions here. Who has a question?" I took those 3 questions. We started playing. And as there were misunderstandings that became apparent, I might pause it. I might teach it. Or if someone had a question, I might find them when they were not in play and explain it to them there. That's one of the reflections I had as far as something that I could improve on with teaching those platform games. And the last thing was just I needed to spend a little bit more thought on maximizing the space and locations of groups when we split athletes up to learn those platform games. Some of my transitions were a little clunky because I hadn't really thought through enough which groups would be at which baskets and how I would split up some of that. So Yeah, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. I hope this reflection series can be valuable. Like I said, I'll be sharing these reflections throughout the season. This is probably the longest one that you will get this season, but I hope that they can be valuable to you. And if you have any questions or thoughts or want to learn more about what I'm doing with this team, feel free to send me an email at luke@cuttingedgecoach.com. Thanks for listening.